Hello, 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 everyone. This is Minister Dr. Akila Ka Ma'at. I'm happy to be here. Welcome, welcome, welcome. Love and lights. Welcome, all my friends, to the Black Light series. I am so excited about this series, and I'm not going to start to preamble it completely because I got my notes. But there are some things that I want to share with you as we begin this series. And the idea is to grow through this series. This series is for seekers. Seekers are folks who feel damaged by a society that doesn't honor them. Okay, providing a different perspective of what honoring self could look like, can look like, should look like. Okay, so if you're advanced in this whole metaphysical world, this may not necessarily be the presentation for you, although you're more than welcome to stay. But this is for folks who were like me at a certain time, just done, done, done with the BS, done with the need to prove, having to get externally validated in a way that doesn't even resonate, but that was necessary to go into these spaces where really nut and bolts, some spaces, they don't want you there. And if you go there, you got to cover up, dim down, deal with the aggressions. It's not funny. It almost destroyed me. Okay, but I have grown, grown, grown. So welcome, welcome, welcome all to the Black Light series. I'm really excited about this. I've sent out a couple of videos on this, couple of reels. But what I want to do is get it set up so you understand the resources and the way in which participation or engagement in this series should work. So the first thing I want to share with you is the resources. Okay, this is my Linktree bio. Okay, and it is in it's the link in bio, right? The Linktree. Okay, and so I have dedicated the whole top space of this Linktree. I have dedicated it to the resources for this Black Light series. Okay, and as you can see, I don't know, this has a overview of the series with the schedule. And I do want to take you to this Black Light activation guide, okay? Because the whole where'd it go? I'm sorry. I meant to put this up. Oh, I know why I didn't, because it says something about it won't work well if so. Okay, I have to bring up the other link, but give me a second here. This is everything you need to know about the series. You have the overview, you have a Black Light activation guide, which I'm going to share with you. And then you have all of the videos, which is, on one side with the woman with the black dot. These are the commentaries on Tuesday. These are all uploaded, as you can see on the side. And next to them, and these are at 2:30 on Tuesdays, and next to them are the actual guided meditations that relate to the teaching and, of course, the Black Light series. These are all here, okay? You can also go to the YouTube and subscribe, right? Subscribe and get notifications, which I recommend. Additionally, this is on TikTok. On Thursday, we do an actual teaching. Today is commentary. Tonight is guided meditation. And then we follow up with a more meaty teaching about these concepts. And so we have today at 2:30 Then it's at 6:30 guided meditation. And then Thursdays at 6 p.m. on TikTok is the teaching series. So you can go to link in bio and click on YouTube and TikTok. I think I may have it in the YouTube description, the actual link to TikTok, since I'm really incorporating this stuff into, I don't know what's going on here. Okay, I had to stop sharing. All right. So let me show you so yes, I'm excited. I'm just running my mouth right now. Okay. So what I'd like to do now, I showed you the link in bio. This is your resource. There's so many things on here that you can access, but the most important thing is really the information for this series. And let me pull up the activation guide. Give me a second here. Okay, let me see if you're seeing what I'm seeing. Full screen. That's the full screen. Let's not do anything. This is the Black Light activation. This is the companion guide for the Black Light series. This doesn't include the teaching. That will probably have its own little notes that I will send out. But this indeed gives you, an overview of the episodes as well. And this can be downloaded as a PDF. You just get some information. Oh, I got 2 series on there. Okay. And then we go into Melanin metaphysics, the main concepts, the black dot, Kemet, and Kemetic spirituality. And it gives you this Ubuntu is in there, and we'll go through all those concepts. It talks about the power release framework and its relationship to this teaching. And then it gives you a lot of wonderful, wonderful things. And it is a practice guide that you're to use with each episode and the guided practice. It gives you the core teaching, and then you have a 21-day calendar radiance commitment tracker. Okay, so this is helping you grow your own radiance, melanin radiance. Okay, and so this has in it. Let me just get to the what are you seeing on your thing? So let me just read to you. Black Light activation is a transformative journey through the Black Light series, inviting readers to reclaim their inherent power through the lens of melanin metaphysics. With practical exercises, reflection prompts, and a 21-day commitment tracker, this guide helps seekers to dismantle internalized inadequacies and radiate from their authentic self and raise their vibration to overcome any challenge. Discover how to embrace your melanin as a cosmic instrument and unlock your profound divine potential within you. So this is a pretty substantive guide that I'm excited to share. All right. So I'm back. Oh, wait. Is this where I'm at? So you have the link in bio, lays out the series. Again, I suggest you go to TikTok and YouTube, follow, subscribe, hit notifications so that you're aware of what's happening in this series, and activate the link in bio with the Black Light activation, the companion guide for the series, so that you have something you can work through while you are here. Okay, and so let's get straight to it. All right. Today, the presentation is, this episode is going to focus on you not being a deficit and the truth about your light, right? The black light. Okay. So this is going to be, and I am going to give a preamble to the script. Okay. I'm not going into serious history, although I am going into it, but this is not a history lesson. This is setting the scene for what we have experienced, why and how, because we have to recognize it. As you know, we have to recognize it in order to name it, to release, and then reframe. So, I encounter so many young folks who don't, they say, what's it got to do with me? Just like our counterparts, right? I wasn't back then. I had nothing to do with that. Right. But these energies and vibrations still resonate in this society and have real world consequences continually at every level of our society, particularly in policy, which actually crafts and engineers the environments that we have and what resources we have in them, right? And so it's important to recognize what happened, to name what is happening, right? To begin to understand how we can sloth, buff brush this stuff off our melanin, which is everywhere, not just on top of us, but inside of everyone, inside of everyone. Black folks just have a added extra wonderful sensory layer that's right here. Yes, yes, yes. So, I'm going to start off with, before I say anything else, I do want to acknowledge, what it costs some of you just to show up here today. Not the logistics, right? Not finding the link. I mean the deeper cost. The cost of being willing to sit still long enough to feel something, to learn something, to know something in a moment when the safer, more numbing option is to keep scrolling, because we all, well, I don't know what kind of dopamine hits come from watching social media, like reels. I put them up, I watch them, but I'm not a scroller. But we just want something quick, make us feel good, or to feed what we already know. Okay, we keep consuming that. Keep staying at the surface of your own life, because the surface is the only place that doesn't ask anything of you, right? Because the numbing option is to keep scrolling, keep consuming, and keep staying at the bare minimum of understanding you and your life. Because the surface is the only place that doesn't ask anything of you. It just feeds you hamburger helper daily. I use hamburger helper a lot because that's a quintessential boxed meal, right? For consumption, along with some of these other things I could mention. But the United States of Americans is all about consumerism, keep consuming, all about prepackaged quick fixes. I don't have to go into all that right now. I've talked about it in some of the other lessons, but it's really all about you being distracted from any reality about who you are. Just let me tell you who you are. At the surface level, let me keep it consistent with the messages so that you just know who you are, right? So this is a different kind of space. This is the kind of space that people don't really want to sit in because they bought the sauce, they ate the hamburger helper, and believe they know everything about who they are and don't want to hear anything else, especially if it's not religion. I don't preach religion. I don't preach at all. I communicate spirituality, okay? As a minister, interfaith minister, spirituality, right? And you definitely can't be spiritual in any real way if you are consuming hamburger helper, as that's a metaphor for everything that is an easy, quick fix. Just add water. Don't ask any questions. And maybe some butter. Gotta have a flavor, right? To make it taste good going down. All right. So what we're building together over the next 3 weeks is definitely not entertainment. So if you want entertainment, you're not going to get it from me. Okay. It is not a pep talk, right? I could do motivational speaking all day and night. But in my reality and what I see, what really does that do? You get pepped up for a minute, and then what? So This is not a spiritual bypass, one of those conversations that feel good for 90 minutes and then ask nothing of your actual life when you close the laptop and go back to that life. You could just be the same old, doing the same old thing and believe that you are indeed happy in the same old thing. What this series is about is the most uncomfortable and the most necessary kind of truth telling. All right. The kind that starts with what was done to Black people, what was done to us, walks through what we have done to ourselves in response, and lands somewhere none of us could have arrived at without making that full passage. Okay. I've been doing this work personally, professionally, spiritually for a great portion of my adult life. It didn't really hit home this work I was doing until I left my ivory tower, okay, and reclaimed my voice, okay, and my power. And the thing I keep returning to is this: the freedom that lasts is not the freedom that jumps over the pain. It is the freedom that walks through it with its eyes open, because that is the first step of the power of release: awareness, seeing, recognizing. Today is that walk, particularly for folks who don't really know what happened centuries ago in this country. And I don't even know if they teach this stuff anymore in schools. We begin in history, as I mentioned earlier, not because the past is more important than the present. It is not, but because the present is incomprehensible without it. The assault you are experiencing right now in your body, in your community, in your faith, in this country's capacity to treat you as fully human, that assault has a genealogy. And you cannot recognize what you are fighting when you don't know its name. So let's name it, all of it, or a piece, probably a small piece of it compared to all the stuff that has happened in this country. Many of us love, call home, and just want to be free in. So let's get to it. Okay, so the shadow American chattel slavery system, that's chattel, CHATTEL, that operated in the United States from early 17th century until about 1900, probably longer, but I'm just going with some of the big years, was not simply an economic arrangement, okay? It was, excuse me. I hate when that happens. It was, give me a second, I got to put this on Do Not Disturb. It was, among other things, a psychological project of extraordinary ambition. Its goal was not only to extract labor from Black bodies, its goal was to produce, through calculated methods of dehumanization and social engineering, a permanent underclass that could neither imagine nor organize its own liberation. That project did not end when the last enslaved person was technically freed. And of course, I have a running track in my head, was there a last enslaved? We may not even know who that was. But the project adapted, okay? It institutionalized. It went not really underground, but it was produced into structures of laws and systems, and perhaps most lethally into the psyche of the people it was designed to destroy. So let me be specific about how. There's a document that circulates in conversations about history called the Willie Lynch Letter. I don't know how many of you are aware of this Willie Lynch letter. It is a speech delivered in 1712 by a British slave owner named Willie Lynch, addressed to Virginia plantation owners on the methods of effective slave control. And you understand that the first slave ship through the Middle Passage hit Virginia, I think it's in 1619. Yeah, so he was like letting them know what they had to do. And I want you to sit with that for a moment because it matters. Nothing can be more potent than the actual letter itself, but I'm not going to read it here. But the Willie Lynch letter describes strategies in chilling, systematic detail that are documented throughout the historical record of American slavery. The tactic of turning enslaved peoples against one another, the exploitation of skin tone was a manufactured hierarchy. The strategy separating families to prevent solidarity, the deliberate cultivation of distrust between men and women, between older and younger generations, between those who worked in the house and those who worked in the field, and the means to break the will of slaves aligned with how a mule or horse is broken so they no longer seek freedom. I'm not saying aligned, and I'm putting those words in mule or horse. In this letter, Willie Lynch talks about you break a slave like you break a horse. Okay? These are not theoretical propositions. All of that was practiced policy. The document names what happened, and what happened produced effects that are still visible in Black communities today and within Black folks today. Colorism, preference of lighter skin tones within Black communities did not arise spontaneously from some internal preference. It was manufactured. It was enforced, as a matter of fact. Enslaved peoples who were the offspring of rape by their enslavers were sometimes assigned different roles within the plantation hierarchy, closer to the house, further from the most brutal field labor. That proximity was not kindness, okay? It was a wedge. It created gradations of suffering, small differentials of status that generated one thing a plantation owner most feared: solidarity among the enslaved, right? If people were fighting each other over small differences in their suffering, they were not organized against the source of it. That wound is 400 years old and it is not healed. We see it in who we call beautiful, in who we trust, in the quiet arrhythmic of skin tone that operates beneath our conscious awareness of hiring, in dating, in community leadership, in spiritual teachers, in professors, even in the distribution of medical attention. These are not character failings, my friends. They are the residue of a system that spent centuries engineering them into permanence. But the psychological engineering of slavery was not limited to horizontal divisions within enslaved communities. There was also the vertical dimension, the ideological project of convincing the enslaved and convincing the watching world that their condition was natural, inevitable, ordained, that they were in some fundamental way suited to bondage. This is where the scientific establishment enters the story. Because chattel slavery needed to sustain itself morally, legally, and politically in a nation built on Enlightenment principles, liberty, and human dignity, slavery required justification. I'm laughing because we see the contradictory way in which Caucasians work, right? And it really sort of reveals their lack of superiority. First of all, due to the lies and the hypocrisy. Far from superior. I would say they are master con people. Cons. And I laugh at that. As should you. So the justification of slavery, not just the convenience of it, not just the economic necessity of it, to exploit Black peoples and break them like a horse and rape them, maim them. It required the intellectual architecture of a civilization to declare, the nation to declare that the people being enslaved were not fully human in the ways that would make their enslavement morally problematic. 3/4 Black meant you weren't human, or meant you were Black and you weren't human. 3/5, 3/4. And the scientists of antebellum United States of Americans obliged. Okay. We got some major errors here. All right. So Samuel Morton was a Philadelphia physician, respected, published, credentialed in every sense of the era, in every way that was recognized. Okay. He spent decades measuring human skulls. This wasn't his idea. This all came from Europe because they were doing some of this work because there was justifications for slavery in various parts of Europe. Okay. But here in the United States of Americans, this man was spending decades measuring skulls. He filled cranial cavities with seeds, then with lead shot, a particular type of thing, lead shot, to determine their internal volume, how big. Okay. He measured skulls from 5 racial categories as he defined them. In conclusion, presented with tables and measurements and the full apparatus of scholarly legitimacy, was exactly what his area expected. Caucasian skulls were the largest and most developed. African skulls were the smallest and least developed. That's interesting because a skull does not think. Its capacity is not thinking. It's the brain that does it. Okay. Then Harvard biologist Stephen J. Gould later reanalyzed Morton's original data, the same skulls, same measurements, and found that Morton had systematically, if unconsciously, manipulated his procedures. Go figure. And he packed seeds more densely into the skulls. He expected to find superior and more loosely into skulls. He packed seeds more densely into skulls he expected to find superior, and more loosely into skulls he expected to find inferior. The science was not the finding. The finding was the justification. The science was the costume worn to make the justification look like a discovery. Josiah Knott and George Glidden built on Morton's framework in the mid 1800s. The volume was called Types of Mankind, an 800-page argument for polygenism. Okay, the theory that the races of humanity were not descended from a common ancestor at all, but were separate species, separately created in a permanent hierarchy. Black folks in this framework were a distinct and inferior creation. This was not a fringe thought at the time, my friends. This was mainstream academic consensus in antebellum United States of Americans. And then there was Samuel Cartwright, a Louisiana physician whose contribution to the medical literature of his era was a condition he called drapetomania. He coined this term from the Greeks, the dropetes. I know I may not be saying that right. A runaway slave and mania, madness, to describe what he characterized as a mental illness specific to enslaved Black folks. The compulsion, the irrational desire to flee captivity. You have to be a sick mofo to believe that to be free was a compulsive sickness, insanity. Only someone lacking in humanity would claim something so inhumane about another group of people. In Samuel Cartwright's medical framework, the desire to be free was indeed a disease, a symptom of pathology in Black folks who could not settle contentedly into bondage. In Samuel Cartwright's medical framework, the desire to be self-determining was a disease, a symptom of pathology in Black persons who could not settle contentedly into brutal, violent bondage. The most fundamental expression of human nature, the refusal to accept dehumanization, was reframed as a mental illness when it appeared in the Black body. And I just want to say, contemporarily, with all this stuff happening with Trump and fascism, everybody kept jumping, talking about he got this from Hitler. No. That is such a smoke and mirror deflection as to the insidious, disgusting dehumanization of people here in America. No. This ain't come from Hitler. Hitler took from us. These scientists took from us. Granted, Europe was doing their research too, but America perfected. And we think about concentration camps. Of course, he got that from us. What do you think? On the plantations where the slaves lived were concentration camps. No food, exploitation, nothing, scraps. Same thing that's happening in these so-called detention camps with melanin dominant peoples in there. Let's say it one more time. What's happening here with Stephen Miller and Trump is a result of the United States of Americans' perception and policy and manufacturing and engineering of Black folks in this country. It didn't come completely from Hitler. He may have read Hitler's speeches, but this whole thing about the degradation, dehumanization of Black folks, melanin dominant folks, was here. Here. So let's get that history right, because I'm so sick of hearing, oh, Hitler, Hitler. No, mofos. This, excuse my French, no, this action now is a product of the history here in this sickly, evolved community we call the United States of America. So Thomas Jefferson, that was an aside. I kind of got a little passionate with that one. Thomas Jefferson, in his notes on the state of Virginia, expressed his suspicions that Black people were mentally inferior to white people, and used that suspicion to rationalize the continuation of an institution he privately acknowledged was a moral catastrophe. It seems like white folks have been doing this forever, doing crazy stuff to hurt people while going in the back room and saying this is bad. That's a characteristic that's playing out big time right here and now. They say it's bad. We'll get into some Caucasian characteristics in another series. I'm gonna stick with what I'm doing now because I could really go a little bit.
If you think it could be serious,
I don't know what Siri talking about. It's like, if you think it could be serious. Thomas Jefferson, the man who wrote, all men are created equal. And we know that wasn't for nobody else but white men, okay? Held more than 600 people in bondage across his lifetime. He freed 2 of them. The contradiction was not accidental. It was load-bearing. The entire architecture of the United States of Americans' democracy required a theory of Black subhumanity to function as designed. So they didn't simply take your labor. They built a civilization on the premise that you were less than human and then made science agree. These ideas did not die with the Emancipation Proclamation. They did not die with Brown versus Board. They did not die with the Voting Rights Act. They became the foundation that subsequent systems were built on. The unremarked assumption beneath the hiring decision, the loan denial, the wrongful conviction, the medical dismissal, the tenure rejection. We became the source of all those deficits. The story told to the world was that we were the source of our own deficit and eventually absorbed by us. That something fundamental is wrong with being Black. And you don't have to consciously be thinking this. Psychological Change of Slavery explains it really well by Naim Akbar, one of my foundational texts when I was in my 20s. You know, that's the architecture. That the society is not the issue, it's us. And even some Black folks believe that. They really do. They're really conditioned in armor to think that we are the problem. So that's the architecture, and that is what we're working with, you know, recognizing it. All right. So let me tell you about your body, because everything I just described, the legal violence, the pseudoscience, the psychological engineering, of course, it didn't stay in the history books. It came home with our great-grandparents. It came into the houses where our grandparents were raised. It was in the air, in the schools where our parents sat. It is in us right now in ways we are often unable to name because the water we swim in has always been that water. It's the air we breathe. The water you swim in has always been this water. Dr. Joy DeGry, and I hope I'm pronouncing that right, a researcher and clinician with decades of work in this field, has written about what she calls post-traumatic slave syndrome, a framework for understanding the multi-generational trauma that emerged from chattel slavery and its aftermath. The argument is not mystical, it is straightforward. When a people endured 2 centuries of systematic terror, dehumanization, family separation, and the violent severance of culture, language, spiritual practice, and identity, and then is released into a society that continues to inflict violence and discrimination without any period of general repair, restoration, or reckoning, the trauma does not resolve. It adapts, it transmits, it appears in the bodies and behaviors and internal voices of people who have never personally been enslaved. I've talked about epigenetics as part of this. We are living this. And epigenetics is the study of how environmental stress alters gene expression across generations without changing DNA is bearing out. Research on Black Americans document measurable HPA, hypothalamus axis dysregulation, and elevated stress hormone response that cannot be fully explained by genetics or social economics alone. This emerging field of epigenetics, it's important. It has demonstrated that trauma can be transmitted across generations. Absolutely. Studies on Black Americans document this very severe, chronic, cumulative racial stress. The chronic dysregulation of this system, the HPA axis, and higher rates of stress-related illnesses, hypertension, preterm birth, accelerated cellular aging, that is not explained by socioeconomic factors because it happens from having little or no money to having a mass amount of money. Your body carries the memories that were never consciously given to you. The hypervigilance you feel when you enter certain spaces. Hypervigilance is, always being aware that something's going to happen. And that's not happen good, that's happen bad. Always I would tell my son, keep your head on a swivel. That was me conditioning him with hypervigilance. I thought it was safety, but it was something ingrained to him. I didn't pick that up. That was already inside of me. All right. So when you enter certain spaces, the nervous system lifts into different registers of alertness with the hypervigilance, the scanning, the calculation of how much of yourself is safe to reveal. That's a survival adaptation. And it's not a character flaw. And it's not paranoia. Not a clinical anxiety disorder that breathing differently will resolve. No. It's a survival adaptation developed across generations of genuine threat. The exhaustion that comes not from physical labor, but from the continuous performance of safety. From translating yourself into whatever register the white gaze requires. From anticipating the microaggressions. I hate micro because they're all aggressions. Anticipating the aggression before it arrives so you can decide in a fraction of a second whether to address it or let it pass, or don't even decide anything. just absorb that stuff. That is also a survival adaptation. But survival adaptations become their own kind of prison when the acute threat recedes and the nervous system has never been given the language or context or space to return to baseline. Dr. Robert Carter, a psychologist in Columbia University, spent decades making the case for race based traumatic stress as a legitimate clinical category, distinct from PTSD, but arising specifically from experiences of racial discrimination and race-based violence. And let me tell you, violence does not always have to be somebody shooting you or beating you up. Even discrimination is violence. It's all violence. Dr. Carter's research catalogs the ways that racialized experiences produce genuine trauma symptoms: hypervigilance, intrusion, avoidance, physiological reactivity. The body responds to racial aggression as it responds to any mortal threat. Because historically, and in many contexts currently, it has been one mortal threat. And I just want to say, I was diagnosed with occupational related PTSD because of my job, and it was a very hostile white environment for the entire 25 years I was in the Ivory Tower as an academic, as a professor, research scientist. No one will call it race-based. It was all like a hostile work environment, right? But I felt these things: hypervigilance, intrusion, avoidance, physiological reactivity. I sat in all that, but didn't believe I could leave, because what would I have? I mean, I got over that real quick. I'd rather have nothing than have that craziness. But, you know, what Dr. Robert Carter is arguing for is indeed very real to very many Black Americans here in the United States. Now, here's where I want to go into something more uncomfortable. People don't like it when I talk about this, okay? Because so far I've been talking about what was done to us from the outside. But this is the psychological chains of slavery conversation in a different way. But the most insidious dimension of that history is what eventually happened happens on the inside. Something called internalized racism. Now, internalized racism is sort of the landscape of the psychiatrist, psychologist. I like to use the word appropriated racism. That's more aligned with behavioral health and social science. Appropriated racism. That is indeed another way to talk about internalized racism without having the need to have a clinical degree or license. Appropriated racism. Appropriated racism is what happens when a person absorbs through media, through education, through accumulated texture of daily life in a white supremacist society, the dominant culture's negative values of their own racial group. It begins to apply these valuations to themselves and to other members in their community. And I'm going to say, when I say appropriated or internalized, this is not conscious thought. It's like being in the water, right? It's all natural because you don't think about it. It's conditioning, socialization. That's just clicked on, and that's what it is. So don't think, oh, I don't think like that. No, you don't have to. It's operating already, right? And some of these guided meditations, some of this stuff in the activation guide, you have opportunity to see what indeed you are internalizing or appropriating. You know, is the voice that tells you your natural hair is unprofessional. And granted, there's a lot of us Black folks who really don't care about any of that anymore, but there are a whole bunch who believe natural hair is unprofessional. And if they get natural hair, it has to be done in a highly professional manner so as not to have any everything that's messy or musty has to be like perfect, you know? And it's not someone else's voice who's telling you this at this time. It is your own voice with appropriated racism, the one you wake up with, okay? It is the surveillance of other Black people that produces the cringe. The way you sometimes want certain members of your community to be quieter, less visible, less whatever it is you've been taught to read as threatening or too much. It is the achievement trap, the way you can accomplish something genuinely extraordinary and still feel in the private center of yourself like you got lucky. Like they'll figure it out eventually. I ain't talking about white women here, I'm talking about Black people, okay? Like the credential or the recognition is a costume and someone is going to identify you as the imposter you've always suspected yourself to be. And of course, they gave it a name, imposter syndrome. What they don't do is explain its origins with any precision. Because imposter syndrome, in the context of Black achievement in predominantly white institutions, is not a cognitive distortion. It is a rational response to a documented history of having your competence questioned beyond what is ever asked of your white colleagues. Your credentials scrutinized, your presence in spaces of achievement treated as anomalous rather than deserved. Now, we have another explanation of appropriated racism. Kenneth Clark and his wife, Mamie Clark, conducted a series of studies in the 1940s that some will call the most cited social science research in American history. They placed Black children, some as young as 3 years old, in a room with two dolls, one with light skin, one with dark skin. They asked the children to identify which doll was the nice doll, which was the bad doll, which one they wanted to play with, and then which doll looked like them. The majority of Black children in these studies associated positive qualities with the white doll. When asked which doll looked like them and then asked which doll was the bad doll, some of the children cried. Why? Because the doll looked like them was Black, and the Black doll was the bad doll. Okay? These findings were presented before the Supreme Court, evidence that segregation caused measurable psychological harm to Black children. I have some thoughts on segregation. No, I'll save those. The court agreed. The ruling addressed the schools. Nobody addressed what had already been done to the children inside of them. And then we have Frantz Fanon. Yes, read his books. He wrote in 1952 in Black Skin, White Mask that the colonized subject internalizes the colonizer's gaze, comes to see themselves through it, comes to measure their own worth against the standards of the civilization that enslaved and colonized them. He was writing about Martinique under French colonial rule. He could have been writing about any Black child in any American city any decade since. Look, the script that says you're not enough was written before you were born, and it was handed to you as if it were in your own voice. The work of this series, and I want to be clear that this is not a comfortable series, okay, begins with recognizing the script as a script, not as your truth, as something written by specific people for specific purposes and handed down through systems and media and sometimes through the mouths of people you love the most. Because what they're trying to protect you from, a world that has already hurt them. They don't want you to get hurt. You did not create this wound, but you are the only one who can release it. Now, look, I'm getting this going, and it may go to 4. Some of you may be sitting with all that history and thinking that's then, especially these young folks, that's then. They just been so duped. Many of them don't even care about what happened back then. And maybe I'm making a generalized statement. If I'm not, some young folks, let me know in the comments, okay? We've come further, and even some Black folks, older, right? Or maybe that they made it. That was then. This is now. I made it. Look, we have come further since, all right? And then this week happened, and the week before that. Let me be precise about the present. In Alabama, following a 2020 consensus. And look, I'm going through this because you got to recognize. We all got to recognize. I didn't recognize this really. It didn't really sit on me until I was like in my 40s, 50s. In Alabama, following the 2020 census, the Republican-controlled state legislator drew congressional maps that the federal courts found diluted Black voting power in violation of the Voting Act rights, right? Despite Black folks comprising more than 27% of the state's population. The Supreme Court in Merrill versus Milligan in 2023 affirmed the lower court's ruling and ordered new maps. The state legislators responded by drawing new maps that civil rights attorneys and federal judges, again, found to be non-compliant. The message to Black voters in Alabama was explicit. Your political representation is not our priority, and we will keep this fight going as long as it takes. This is not an isolated incident. Remember, Paraverly talks about pattern? It is a pattern. So, the Voting Rights Act in 1965, the group described by John Lewis as the most significant piece of domestic legislation he witnessed in his lifetime. There was a problem with that. I don't want to read all this. But that was overturned in many ways and dramatically changing in the South, declared that things had changed dramatically in the South and that the protections were outdated. There's no more racism. And within hours of that ruling, Texas announced strict ID rulings or law. North Carolina moved to eliminate same-day voter registration and cut early voting. State after state implemented restrictions that voting rights scholars documented as disproportionately burdening Black voters, okay? So, the courts have deemed some of this activity unlawful, but it happened nonetheless, okay? Things had changed enough to remove the protection, which is, they thought, right? Which it wasn't really a thought. It was more of the con, right? Not enough to prevent the harm that it had been protecting against. So in Florida, the state of board of education approved new standards in 2023, instructing enslaved people develop skills, which in some cases could be applied for their personal benefit. A United States senator who carried enslaved ancestors into her lineage stood publicly and wept because implication, the lie, the con, is that slavery was in some dimension vocational preparation. Yeah, vocational preparation for white folks who didn't do nothing. We trained them. They were sitting on their butts, or they were really, really poor. And they pitted us against them. Look, I'm going to get some comments, perhaps, maybe, I don't know, but I'm going to keep it going. You know, that your ancestors were not dragged across an ocean in chains and forced into generational unpaid labor under the constraints of constant threat of death, but were, in some sense, developing a vocation. This is not a misunderstanding. It is a deliberate rewriting of a record that threatens the comfort of those who benefit from its burial. And then we have again in Florida, they removed AP African American Studies curriculum in 2023, all right, including units of reparations on the Black Lives Matter movement, on intersectionality. They framed these removals as academic neutrality. A con, because it's not neutral if they're getting rid of it. It's presenting somebody's perspective. There is no neutrality in deciding which history a child is permitted to know. And across the country, there's been book bans targeting Black literature at a rate that is not coincidental. Toni Morrison, James Baldwin, Jacqueline Woodson. These are removed from school libraries. These books are being disproportionately that center Black experience, Black history, and just, I hate to use the word Black excellence, but the way in which we are powerful, right? I ain't talking about Melanin, I'm talking about the things that we do. The National Museum of American History and Culture in Washington, which houses over 36,000 objects documenting the history, culture, and humanity of Black Americans, has faced pressure and targeting as the broader political project to frame the acknowledgement of Black history itself a form of divisiveness. The people who created the division are deciding what counts as divisive. Diversity, equity, inclusion programs, which I never believed in the first place. And I'm maybe do a whole thing on the spiritual component of that, right? It made modest institutional attempts to create conditions that were not historically exclusionary, all right? And they're being dismantled from everywhere. Universities, corporations, and government agencies, right? The rhetorical framing is that race-conscious policy is itself a form of racism. I'm telling you all of this not to drive you into despair, my friends. I am not interested in a spirituality that bypasses the reality of what is happening to us or what has happened to us. I am not interested in performing a calm I have not actually found. I'm naming it because the pattern matters. That is the power of release, recognition. What are these patterns? Every time Black people in this country have made substantive gains in representation, in economic power, in cultural visibility, in political standing, there has been a systematic, often violent backlash. And the attack is most intense when the light is brightest. Like Barack Obama in office, now they're undoing everything he ever did. Like the burning down of Greenwood, Black Wall Street, right? And Rosewood and many other places. So when it's burning bright, that's where the attack is almost profoundly, I shouldn't say almost, is most profoundly intense. This is not accidental. Think about the runaway slaves. That's a bright light. Those people, look, the runaway slave, the brutality visited upon them in hot boxes where they roasted like an animal. No, it's not accidental. And understanding it as a pattern rather than an endless series of unrelated incidents, which they want you to see it as, changes what you understand yourself to be navigating. Things that I didn't even know. I saw, but couldn't comprehend. You're not navigating bad luck. You're not you are navigating a system that is behaving as designed, and that knowing that should not defeat you. Not at all. Knowing it should wake you up to something else entirely. And here is where I want to go somewhere different. Because everything I've said until now has been building toward a question that the rest of this series will spend 3 weeks answering. Okay? And I want to begin answering it tonight. And we probably have about 25 minutes left. What if the very thing that made you a target was always simultaneously your greatest inheritance? And no, I'm not speaking in metaphor. I want to talk to you about what melanin really is, not what you absorbed from a society that decided to make it a stigma and told you to put on sunscreen when we have a natural sunscreen of 30, almost 30% SPF. And black people won't put on sunscreen. It's okay. We're all somewhere, right? What it actually is, melanin, at the level of biochemistry, material science, and the emerging research that mainstream science has only recently begun to take seriously. This is a very long, how many pages I got left? Oh my goodness. I got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. This is 20 pages long. You know, I always have a lot to say, but I'll just get started. Whatever's left over, I will pack it in to the next, or maybe have more than 4 weeks, more than 3 weeks worth of information, because this is a really big subject. And there's so many people that tackle this on YouTube. Read it, look it up. Melanin spirituality, you know, because it's real. I'm just going to get into some of this biochemistry, material science, and some of this emerging research, right? Melanin is a biopolymer, a large, complex organic molecule synthesized in special cells called melanocytes from an amino acid called tyrosine or tyrosine, excuse me. It exists in several forms in the human body. Eumelanin, which produces the brown and black pigmentation of the skin and hair. Pheomelanin, which produces red and yellow tones. Neuromelanin, which is found in specific regions of the brain. At the most basic function, melanin in your body's primary, melanin is your body's primary light management system. It absorbs electromagnetic radiation across a remarkably wide spectrum: ultraviolet light, visible light, and portions of infrared range, and dissipates that energy as heat rather than allowing it to penetrate and damage the cellular DNA beneath. Melanin is at the molecular level a protector, a shield, a converter of energy that could destroy. A converter of energy that could destroy into energy that can. Excuse me, I wrote this wrong. It's a shield of converter of energy that cannot be harmed. Think about the context of everything we just talked about. But the story of melanin does not stop at the skin. You know, melanin semiconductor and charged transport properties have been studied at institutions including a university in Sweden, University in Queensland, and in research adjacent to MIT. Current applications under investigation: bioelectronics, biodegradable organic electronics, organic photovoltaic cells. Interesting. Research studying melanin's electrical properties have documented something that surprised them. Melanin behaves as an organic semiconductor. A semiconductor is a material that can conduct electrical charge under certain conditions. The foundational material class of transistors, solar cells, and the entirety of modern electronics. Most organic materials are insulators. Silicon is the classic industrial semiconductor. Your skin contains a molecule that scientists are spending significant resources attempting to manufacture artificially because the version that grows naturally in your body is extraordinary enough to be worth replicating. Okay, sit with that for a minute. And neuromelanin is even more significant. And its full function is not entirely understood. What is understood is that its presence is essential. Neuromelanin is not incidental to how the brain works. It is structural to it. And I will probably need to bring in Bruce Bynum's work in dark light consciousness to talk more about neuromelanin. All right. The connection between melanin and the pineal gland, right? For everybody who's wanting to open up their third eye, that small photosensitive structure in the center of the brain, which now some people say is not a structure, but an area in the brain that produces melatonin and governs the body's relationship to light and darkness, sleep and waking circadian rhythm, is an area of ongoing scientific interest. All right. What is not in dispute is that the body's capacity to regulate its experience of light and darkness, to synchronize itself with the rhythms of the natural world, depends on a biochemical architecture in which melanin-related compounds play a central role. Your biology is tied to the cycles of the earth in ways that most Western medicine has not yet developed adequate language for. Doesn't mean that we can't, right? The same civilization that spent the 1840s using skull measurements to declare African people intellectually inferior is now publishing peer-reviewed research on the extraordinary properties of the biology concentrated in African bodies. And I want you to hold that, all right? Because the same institutions that produced Samuel Morton, Josiah Nott, the entire pseudo-scientific apparatus of racial hierarchy, those same institutions are now filing patents based on melanin's properties, building research programs around it, studying the biology that is most concentrated in the bodies of the people their predecessors spent centuries declaring to be at the bottom of the human hierarchy. Okay? You do not invest in that kind of sustained scientific attention in something you generally believe to be lesser, do you? The attack is always proportional to what is perceived to be at stake. Okay? Now, here is where I want to offer you something additional, something that the laboratory can gesture toward, but has not yet fully mapped. Because this is where we move from what the instruments can currently measure to what ancient wisdom traditions have known for millennia. And I want to be clear that I'm not asking you to choose between science and spirit. I am suggesting that they're describing the same reality from different ends of the human knowledge project. And so we go into different spiritualities. You know, I came to this study via my study of Nubia. And people say that Nubia and Kemet, you know, they exist at the same time. But I came to this understanding of melanin through something called black dot. It's the ancient symbol for blackness. And I thought this was interesting because when I was in the literature, you know, the pharaohs built the pyramids, and at the top of the pyramid, they would put a huge obsidian ball. And it had electromagnetic cosmic properties, the black dot. Okay? And it is the seed of all humanity, archetype of humanity, the hidden doorway to the collective unconsciousness darkness, the shadow, primeval ocean, chaos, the womb, doorway of life. This ancient symbol for blackness was the subject of intense scientific investigation over a period of 300 years, 300,000 years, by profound ancient scientists who were themselves black consciousness. All right. And so looking at the African origin of biological psychiatry by Richard King, one of my mentors I never met, in this work offers that blackness, the universal solvent of all, was seen as, and this is quote, seen as the one reality from which life's loom spun. All colors, all vibratory energies were but a shade of black. Black is the color of the night sky, the primal ocean, outer space, birthplace, and womb of planets, stars, and galaxies of the universe. Black holes were found at the center of our own galaxy and countless other galaxies. Black is the color of carbon, the key atom found in all living matter. Carbon atoms linked together to form black melanin, the first chemical that could capture light and reproduce itself. The chemical key to life and the brain itself was found to be centered around black neuromelanin. Continuing, inner vision, intuition, creative genius, and spiritual illumination were all found to be dependent upon pineal gland blood, born chemical messengers that controlled skin color and opened the hidden door to the darkness of the collective unconscious mind, y'all, allowing the ancient pre-scientists to visualize knowledge from the mind's timeless collective conscious memory bank, end quote. And then there's Kemet, the black land. Okay, we'll talk more about Kemet. You know, melanin was seen as a sensory system capable of absorbing, converting, and storing various forms of light and cosmic energy. In fact, higher levels of melanin elevate a person's spiritual frequency, yet these darker skinned people are the most castigated in America. So the higher levels elevate spiritual frequency, enhance intuition, extrasensory perception, and connection to the universe. And that's the tradition you descend from. And can I finish this? Oh, I can. Here we go. Conclusion. So let me draw the line from everything we have covered today to where the series has taken us. Intuitive melanin metaphysics. My framework is at the center of the Black Light series, holds that melanin is not only a biological compound with remarkable physical properties, it is in the experiential and spiritual dimensions of human life a receiver, a transducer, an instrument through which a melanated body interfaces with what the ancient traditions called the universal life force, the divine intelligence, the source of all, or God. The animating energy that organizes the natural world, connecting us to our ancestors, our spirit guides, and makes possible the capacities that Western culture has reduced to the word intuition. Just intuition. But that might be more precisely be called intelligence in its fullest form. Body and spirit and mind operating not as competing departments, but as one integrated system. This is a philosophical and spiritual framework I offer not as a laboratory science, but as a living lens, one that honors both what the instruments are finding and what the ancient knowledge has always carried, my friends. Within that framework, your intuition is not superstition and it's not to be brushed off. Your capacity to sense what others miss, to read a room, to know what has not been said, to feel the truth before it can even be proven. This is not imagination, my friends. For people whose ancestors were enslaved and therefore had to develop every available nonverbal intelligence just to survive, that capacity is an inheritance. Your connection to the rhythms of the earth, to your ancestors, your spirit guides, to each other. The principle the Bantu peoples called Ubuntu. I am because we are is not a sentiment. It is a description of the relational architecture of existence. At the quantum level, all matter is entangled. The scientific establishment calls this non-locality. The African tradition calls it Ubuntu. They are pointing at the same reality from different ends of the human knowledge project. So, what I'm asking you to sit with today, not to accept unexamined, but to hold as an honest inquiry is this. What if the assault on your identity for 400 years of systematic effort to convince you that your darkness is a deficit was proportional in its intensity to what was actually being threatened? What if you were never the problem? What if you were always in your biology, your ancestry, and your capacity to absorb what would destroy a less equipped organism and transform it into something that sustains life? Let me read that again. What if you were always in your biology, in your ancestry, and your capacity to absorb what would destroy a less equipped organism and transform it into something that sustains life? What if you were always that instrument? That is not an uncomfortable question, I hope. It carries weight in both directions. If the attack was proportional to the gift, then you are called to do something with what you carry. That is not easier than believing the lie. In some ways, it is harder. But it is truth, my friends. And the truth, even when it is heavy, is the only thing that has ever actually set anyone free. What I'm offering you over the next 3 weeks, through teaching, through practice, through community, we are building inside this live space is a passage, okay? It's not from pain to bypass, from pain to passage, from the closed fist to the open hand. The closed fist is what happens when you've been hurt enough times that you stop reaching. When you grip the wound instead of the possibility. When the survival adaptations that kept your grandparents alive start running the show in a moment when something larger is available to you. The open hand is what this series is building toward. not a hand that has never known pain, a hand that has known pain and opened anyway. My friends, you are not the deficit you never were. You are the black light. And this right here, right now, is where we begin. I want to thank you so much, my friends, for sitting in this session. Ashe, ashe, ashe. Okay, if anything resonated, please make a comment, right? Let me know you saw this. If you want to correct something, correct it. I would just say if you're just going to come on here and cuss me out, I can handle that too, but it is a real waste of your time, not mine. But I'm open to all. Have a beautifully abundant and prosperous day. I'm Minister Dr. Akila Ka Ma'at, and this is the beginning of the Black Light series. Thank you. Be blessed. Indeed.